For centuries, the words of the Bible have been passed down through generations, shaping the beliefs, values, and histories of billions of people. But what if there were hidden texts, ancient scriptures lost to time, that could shed new light on the origins of the Bible and the world in which it was written? The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is one of the most groundbreaking events in biblical archaeology, revealing a long-lost world of religious thought, prophecy, and hidden wisdom. These fragile scrolls, preserved in desert caves for over 2,000 years, contain some of the oldest known copies of biblical texts, older than any previously discovered manuscripts. But why were they hidden? Who wrote them? And what secrets do they hold? These questions have fascinated scholars, theologians, and historians since their discovery in the mid-20th century. Some believe the scrolls confirm what we already know about the Bible. Others argue that they challenge long-held beliefs and reveal truths that were deliberately obscured. The Dead Sea Scrolls have sparked debates about the origins of Christianity, the role of prophecy, and the hidden knowledge of an ancient Jewish sect that may have influenced early Christian thought. Imagine the world before these scrolls were found, a time when the oldest known biblical manuscripts were from the medieval period, copied and recopied by scribes over centuries. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls changed everything. Suddenly, we had access to writings from a time when the Hebrew Bible was still taking shape. These texts were untouched by later theological debates, unfiltered by centuries of translation and reinterpretation. They offered a glimpse into the beliefs, practices, and hopes of a people who lived in the shadow of the Roman Empire, waiting for the arrival of a promised Messiah. The scrolls were found in the caves of Qumran, near the Dead Sea, a place of isolation and secrecy. Whoever hid them must have known their importance, concealing them carefully to protect them from destruction. But from whom were they hiding? Roman soldiers? Religious authorities? Or were they simply safeguarding the texts for future generations, ensuring that their message would not be lost forever? The significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls extends beyond religious circles. They are a key to understanding the ancient world, the transmission of sacred texts, and the diversity of Jewish thought during the Second Temple period. They reveal prayers, psalms, commentaries, and even apocalyptic visions of the end times. Among them are passages that closely resemble the biblical books we know today, but also others that have never been seen before, lost scriptures that raise intriguing questions about what was once considered sacred. Some of the scrolls contain strikingly familiar words, mirroring passages from the book of Psalms or the prophetic writings of Isaiah. Others introduce completely new perspectives, describing celestial beings, hidden knowledge, and divine mysteries. Could these lost texts hold insights that were intentionally left out of the Bible? Could they reveal missing pieces of history that change the way we understand ancient faith? Even today, the Dead Sea Scrolls remain a source of mystery. Many have been translated and studied, yet some fragments are still being deciphered, their meanings hidden behind ancient scripts and damaged parchment. The process of uncovering their secrets continues, as modern technology allows scholars to reconstruct texts once thought to be lost forever. As we embark on this journey into the past, we will explore how these scrolls were found, what they contain, and what they reveal about the world of the Bible. We will investigate their connection to early Christianity, the theories surrounding their authorship, and the controversies they have sparked. The Dead Sea Scrolls are more than just ancient artifacts. They are a gateway to a hidden history, a puzzle that has yet to be fully solved. The scrolls whisper secrets from a time long past, a time when prophets spoke of the future, when scholars debated the meaning of sacred texts, and when a small community in the Judean desert preserved writings that would one day change our understanding of the Bible. These fragile documents survived centuries of war, conquest, and natural decay, waiting to be uncovered at just the right moment in history. What were they trying to tell us? What knowledge has remained buried for so long? The journey to uncover the lost biblical secret begins here. The greatest discoveries in history often happen by accident. In the case of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the most significant archaeological findings of all time, it was not a scholar or an archaeologist who uncovered them, but a young Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat. It was 1947, and the vast, barren landscape of the Judean desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun. Among the towering cliffs and hidden caves near the Dead Sea, a teenage shepherd named Mohammed Dib and his cousins tended to their flock. As they guided the animals through the rocky terrain, one of the goats wandered off, disappearing among the limestone formations. Determined to find it, Mohammed climbed the rugged cliffs, scanning for any sign of movement. As he searched, his eyes caught sight of a dark opening in the rock, a small cave entrance nestled high above the desert floor. Curiosity took hold of him. Hoping to startle the missing goat out of hiding, he picked up a stone and threw it inside. Instead of the expected rustling of an animal, he heard something entirely different, a hollow sound, followed by the sharp crack of breaking pottery. It was an unusual noise, one that did not belong to the stillness of the desert. Intrigued, he climbed up and squeezed through the narrow entrance. Inside the dimly lit cave, Mohammed found several large clay jars standing against the walls. Some were sealed, others broken, their contents long lost to time. Carefully, he reached into one of the intact jars and pulled out a bundle wrapped in linen. The fabric, ancient and delicate, had preserved the scrolls hidden within. He could not read the strange writing that covered them, nor did he realize that he had just stumbled upon one of the most important biblical discoveries of the modern era. At first, the young shepherd and his companions did not grasp the significance of what they had found. The scrolls seemed old, possibly valuable, but to them, they were just mysterious objects from the past. Hoping to sell them, they took them to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem, a man who often bought historical artifacts from Bedouin tribes. No one understood the true value of the scrolls. Some dismissed them as forgeries or unimportant relics from a bygone era. Others believed they might be medieval copies of religious texts. The scrolls changed hands multiple times, passing through the markets of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Eventually, they reached the attention of scholars who recognized their extraordinary nature. One of the first to study them was Professor Eliezer Sukenik of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. As he unrolled one of the fragile manuscripts, he realized he was looking at a text older than any known biblical manuscript in existence. The ink, the script, the language, it all pointed to a time long before the medieval copies of the Hebrew Bible. These were not ordinary texts. They were ancient scriptures, preserved for thousands of years in the darkness of the cave. The news of the discovery spread quickly, sparking both excitement and skepticism. Were there more scrolls hidden in the caves of Qumran? If so, what secrets did they hold? Archaeologists, scholars, and treasure hunters rushed to the region, hoping to uncover more. Between 1947 and 1956, a total of 11 caves were explored, revealing thousands of manuscript fragments. Some were remarkably well preserved, while others were in pieces, scattered, and fragile. The scrolls were written on parchment, papyrus, and even thin sheets of copper, their words untouched for over 2,000 years. Retrieving the scrolls was not without challenges. The region was in turmoil. The discovery had come at a time of great political tension, as the conflict surrounding the establishment of Israel in 1948 intensified. Some scrolls ended up in the hands of Jordanian authorities, others were obtained by private collectors. At one point, a group of scrolls was even advertised in a newspaper, listed for sale as biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC. Despite these obstacles, scholars worked tirelessly to gather and preserve the texts, knowing they held an immense historical and religious significance. As the fragments were painstakingly pieced together, an astonishing picture began to emerge, a glimpse into a long-lost biblical world. The scrolls contained passages from nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible, with the exception of Esther. Some were strikingly similar to the biblical texts known today, while others revealed variations, suggesting that the scriptures had evolved over time. Alongside these biblical writings were other texts, hymns, prayers, commentaries, and even apocalyptic visions of a coming Messianic age. Scholars began to ask questions that would shape biblical studies for decades to come. Who had written these texts? Why had they been hidden? What did they reveal about the religious beliefs of the time? The accidental discovery in the desert had opened a gateway to an ancient past, one that would challenge traditional understandings of Scripture, inspire new interpretations, and fuel debates that continue to this day. What had begun as a simple search for a lost goat had become something far greater, the key to unlocking a buried treasure of knowledge, a testament to the faith and traditions of a people who lived more than 2,000 years ago. And as researchers continued to examine the scrolls, they realized that their secrets were only beginning to be uncovered. The Dead Sea Scrolls are more than just ancient manuscripts. They are a vast and complex collection of writings that offer an unprecedented glimpse into the religious thought of the time. As scholars carefully studied them, they found that these texts could be categorized into three main groups: biblical texts, apocryphal writings, and sectarian documents. Each of these categories provided unique insights, revealing how sacred scriptures were preserved, interpreted, and even debated among different Jewish communities. The largest portion of the collection consists of biblical texts, including fragments from nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible, except for the Book of Esther. Some of these texts were nearly identical to later versions of the Old Testament, while others contained variations, shedding light on the way Scripture evolved over time. Before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible came from the medieval period, copied by scribes centuries after the original texts were written. But the scrolls pushed this timeline back by over 1,000 years, providing direct evidence of how these sacred writings were transmitted in ancient times. Alongside these biblical manuscripts were writings that did not make it into the final version of the Hebrew Bible, apocryphal and pseudepigraphal texts that had once circulated among Jewish communities, but were later excluded from the biblical canon. Some of these works expanded on familiar biblical stories, offering additional details or alternative perspectives. Others contained hymns, wisdom literature, or apocalyptic prophecies that reflected the spiritual concerns of their time. The presence of these texts among the Dead Sea Scrolls suggests that the process of defining which books were considered scripture was still ongoing during the late Second Temple period. Even more intriguing were the sectarian documents, writings that appeared to belong to a specific religious group that had distanced itself from mainstream Jewish society. These texts describe the rules, beliefs, and rituals of a community that saw itself as the true remnant of Israel, waiting for divine intervention to restore righteousness. Among these were the community rule, which outlined strict guidelines for communal living, and the war scroll, which depicted an apocalyptic battle between the forces of light and darkness. These writings suggest that the people who preserved the scrolls were deeply concerned with purity, prophecy, and the coming of the end times. The scrolls were written primarily in Hebrew, though some were also found in Aramaic and Greek. The choice of language and script varied, with some texts written in the standard square Hebrew script still used today, while others used an older Paleo-Hebrew script that had largely fallen out of use by this period. This linguistic diversity suggests that the scrolls came from different sources and time periods, adding to the complexity of their interpretation. The materials used to create the scrolls were equally fascinating. Most were written on parchment made from animal skins, carefully prepared to withstand the passage of time. Others were inscribed on papyrus, a writing material more commonly associated with ancient Egypt. The most unusual discovery was the copper scroll, a text carved onto thin sheets of copper, listing what appeared to be hidden treasures. Unlike the other scrolls, which contained religious teachings and commentaries, the copper scroll read more like an inventory or a coded message, raising questions about whether it described real treasure or held a symbolic meaning. Deciphering and preserving the scrolls has been a painstaking process. Many of the texts were fragmented, torn apart by time, or damaged by exposure to the elements. Some were nearly complete, while others were in thousands of small pieces, requiring scholars to reconstruct them like a massive puzzle. Advances in modern technology, including digital imaging and infrared scanning, have helped uncover faded writing and reconstruct missing sections, allowing researchers to recover details that had remained hidden for centuries. Beyond their historical and linguistic significance, the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal a world where Jewish thought was diverse and constantly evolving. They show that different groups interpreted Scripture in their own ways, sometimes adding new revelations, sometimes preserving older traditions that would later fade from mainstream Judaism. These texts help us understand the religious landscape of the time, highlighting the debates, expectations, and spiritual anxieties of an era that would soon give rise to one of the most transformative periods in religious history. But who wrote these texts? Who were the people that carefully preserved them in clay jars and hid them away in the caves of Qumran? To answer this question, we must explore the identity of the mysterious scribes who created these writings, their beliefs, and the community they belonged to. The question of who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls has fascinated scholars and theologians since their discovery. While the texts themselves offer no direct answer, clues within the scrolls, combined with archaeological evidence from the Qumran site, suggest that they were produced and preserved by a religious community that lived in the region during the late Second Temple period. But who were these people? The most widely accepted theory points to a group known as the Essenes, a Jewish sect that separated itself from mainstream society in pursuit of spiritual purity. However, not all scholars agree, and alternative theories suggest that the scrolls may have had multiple authors from different backgrounds. The Essenes were a highly disciplined and ascetic group, mentioned in the writings of ancient historians such as Flavius Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder. These accounts describe the Essenes as a Jewish sect that lived in isolated communities, strictly observing the laws of the Torah, practicing ritual purity, and awaiting divine intervention to restore justice to Israel. Unlike the Pharisees and Sadducees, two other influential Jewish groups of the time, the Essenes rejected the political and religious establishment centered around the Jerusalem temple. They believed that the priesthood had become corrupt and that they alone preserved the true understanding of God's will. Many aspects of Essene life, as described by ancient sources, align closely with what is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The community rule, one of the most significant sectarian documents found among the scrolls, outlines a strict code of conduct for a religious community that lived in isolation, followed rigid purity laws, and maintained a structured hierarchy. It describes a process of initiation for new members, a communal lifestyle in which possessions were shared, and a deep sense of separation from outsiders, whom they saw as impure. This matches historical descriptions of the Essenes, who are known for their communal way of life and their rejection of material wealth. Another text, the War Scroll, details an apocalyptic battle between the forces of light and darkness, in which the sons of light would ultimately triumph over the sons of darkness. This reflects the worldview of a group that saw itself as chosen by God, engaged in a cosmic struggle against evil. The Essenes were known to have strong messianic beliefs, expecting not just one but possibly two messianic figures, a priestly Messiah from the line of Aaron, and a royal Messiah from the line of David. This dual Messiah expectation is found in some of the scrolls, suggesting that the community that wrote them shared similar eschatological views. The location of Qumran itself provides further support for the Essene hypothesis. The ruins of an ancient settlement near the caves where the scrolls were found reveal a community that lived in a disciplined, almost monastic lifestyle. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of ritual baths, communal dining halls, and writing rooms, suggesting that the inhabitants placed great emphasis on purity, study, and religious devotion. Given that the Essenes were known for their strict adherence to purity laws and their rejection of the temple priesthood, it is plausible that they saw themselves as a separate, divinely chosen group, safeguarding the true teachings of Israel. Despite the strong evidence linking the scrolls to the Essenes, not all scholars are convinced. Some argue that the scrolls may have come from various Jewish communities, not just a single sect. According to one theory, the scrolls were part of a larger collection of sacred texts that had been hidden in the caves by priests or scribes fleeing Jerusalem during times of crisis, particularly during the Jewish revolt against Rome in 66-78. This theory suggests that the scrolls reflect the broader religious landscape of the time, rather than the beliefs of a single, isolated group. Another possibility is that the scrolls were written by a movement within the wider Jewish priesthood, possibly by members of the Sadducean tradition. Some of the sectarian texts found in the scrolls contain legal interpretations and religious practices that differ from mainstream Pharisaic Judaism, but align more closely with Sadducean beliefs. This has led some researchers to propose that the scrolls were written by a group of dissident priests who had been expelled from the temple and sought refuge in the wilderness. There is also the question of whether all the scrolls found in the Qumran caves were produced by the same community. Some scholars suggest that while the sectarian texts may have been written by a single group, likely the Essenes, the biblical and apocryphal texts may have come from other sources. The presence of multiple scribal styles, variations in language, and different theological perspectives within the scrolls indicate that they may have been collected over time rather than written by a single generation. Regardless of their precise origins, the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls played a crucial role in preserving ancient Jewish traditions and religious texts. Their writings provide a rare glimpse into the spiritual concerns of a group that saw itself as the true remnant of Israel, living in expectation of divine intervention. The texts reflect a deep devotion to the Torah, a belief in apocalyptic prophecy, and a commitment to preserving knowledge for future generations. But if the scrolls were hidden to protect them from destruction, what else might have been lost? Were there other writings that did not survive the passage of time? Among the texts found at Qumran, some contain writings that do not appear in the modern Bible, raising questions about lost books of Scripture and hidden knowledge that may have once been considered sacred. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not just significant for preserving some of the oldest copies of biblical texts. They also contain writings that never made it into the Hebrew Bible or Christian Old Testament. These lost scriptures, apocryphal writings, unknown psalms, and prophetic revelations raise important questions about the nature of sacred texts. Were these writings once considered scripture by some Jewish communities? If so, why were they eventually excluded from the biblical canon? And do they contain hidden wisdom that challenges traditional interpretations of the Bible? Among the most intriguing discoveries at Qumran are texts that closely resemble biblical books, but contain passages that are either expanded or completely absent from the versions we know today. Some of these writings include additional psalms, wisdom literature, and apocalyptic visions that suggest there were once alternative traditions of Scripture, some of which were lost or deliberately set aside over time. The presence of these writings at Qumran indicates that the process of defining what was considered Holy Scripture was still in flux during the Second Temple period. One of the most fascinating finds among the scrolls is the so-called Psalm Scroll, which contains a collection of hymns, some of which match those in the Book of Psalms while others are entirely unknown. This suggests that the Book of Psalms, as we have it today, was not yet finalized at the time the scrolls were written. Some of these additional psalms contain unique theological perspectives, calling upon God for justice, describing angelic visions, or offering new insights into divine wisdom. The discovery of these psalms raises the question, were there once more sacred songs that were later lost or removed? Perhaps even more intriguing are the apocalyptic texts found among the scrolls. These writings describe dramatic visions of the end times, battles between angels and demons, and the coming of a messianic figure who will restore righteousness. Some of these texts bear similarities to the biblical books of Daniel and Revelation, suggesting that Jewish apocalyptic traditions were already well developed during the Second Temple period. One such text, known as the Apocalypse of Weeks, outlines a prophetic vision of history divided into distinct periods, culminating in a final age of divine judgment. The presence of such writings at Qumran indicates that apocalyptic expectations were widespread in Jewish thought at the time, possibly influencing later Christian eschatology. Among the most controversial discoveries is the Book of Enoch, a text that was not included in the Hebrew Bible, but was widely read in Jewish and early Christian communities. Fragments of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming that this book was highly regarded by at least some Jewish groups during the Second Temple period. The Book of Enoch contains detailed descriptions of fallen angels, heavenly visions, and prophecies about the coming of a messianic figure. While it was later excluded from the Jewish canon, it remained influential in certain Christian traditions, particularly in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where it is still considered scripture today. The discovery of these lost books raises important questions about the development of the Bible. If some Jewish groups considered these writings sacred, why were they later removed from the canon? Did early Christian writers draw upon these texts when developing their own theological ideas? And what other ancient writings might have been lost to history, buried in the sands of time, or deliberately suppressed? The presence of these texts among the Dead Sea Scrolls suggests that the biblical canon was not yet firmly established in the centuries leading up to the rise of Christianity. Different Jewish communities may have had different collections of sacred texts, and the process of deciding which books would be included in the Bible was still ongoing. This challenges the common assumption that the Bible has always existed in its present form, showing instead that it was shaped by historical, theological, and political factors over time. But what does this mean for our understanding of the Bible today? Do these lost writings offer insights that were once considered part of divine revelation? And if so, what knowledge has been hidden for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered? To answer these questions, we must turn our attention to the mysterious settlement of Qumran, where these scrolls were carefully preserved. What kind of community lived there, and why did they hide these texts in the caves? Archaeological excavations at Qumran have revealed the remains of a structured, organized community, suggesting that it was home to a religious group that had withdrawn from mainstream Jewish society. The site contains the foundations of buildings, large communal halls, storage rooms, ritual baths, and a sophisticated water system that collected and stored rainwater, an essential feature for survival in the harsh desert environment. The layout of Qumran suggests that its inhabitants lived a disciplined, almost monastic life, devoted to study, prayer, and strict observance of religious laws. One of the most significant features of Qumran is the presence of multiple ritual baths, far more than would be expected for a small settlement. These baths indicate that the community placed a strong emphasis on ritual purity, a concept central to Jewish religious life. The frequency with which the inhabitants performed these purification rites suggests that they viewed themselves as a people set apart, maintaining a state of spiritual readiness. This practice aligns closely with descriptions of the Essenes, the Jewish sect often associated with Qumran, who were known for their strict purity laws and rejection of the corruption they believed had overtaken the Jerusalem temple. Another compelling piece of evidence linking Qumran to the Dead Sea Scrolls is the discovery of what appears to be a scriptorium, a room equipped with benches and inkwells, suggesting that it may have been used for copying and studying sacred texts. If this interpretation is correct, it provides direct evidence that Qumran was not just a place of residence, but a center for religious scholarship, where scribes meticulously preserved and transmitted ancient writings. The presence of the scrolls in nearby caves strengthens the idea that the settlement's inhabitants were responsible for creating or at least safeguarding these texts. Despite the overwhelming evidence that Qumran was home to a religious community, some scholars have proposed alternative theories. Some suggest that Qumran may have been a fortress or a seasonal settlement used by traveling groups, rather than a permanent monastic retreat. Others argue that the scrolls may not have been written at Qumran at all, but were instead brought there from elsewhere, perhaps from Jerusalem, by individuals seeking to protect them from destruction. While these theories remain debated, the close connection between the settlement's archaeological remains and the themes found in the scrolls makes it likely that Qumran was indeed a spiritual and scholarly center. The isolation of Qumran would have provided the perfect environment for a community that sought to distance itself from the outside world. The sectarian writings found among the scrolls suggest that the people who lived there viewed themselves as the true followers of God's law, separate from what they saw as a corrupt society. They awaited divine intervention, believing that God would soon judge the wicked and establish a kingdom of righteousness. Their focus on purity, scripture, and prophecy indicates that they were not simply passive observers of history, but rather a group that saw itself as playing an active role in God's unfolding plan. The ruins of Qumran, combined with the scrolls found in the nearby caves, offer a glimpse into the spiritual landscape of the time. They reveal a world in which different Jewish sects interpreted scripture in various ways, sometimes in conflict with one another. The people of Qumran saw themselves as keepers of divine truth, preserving knowledge that others had ignored or corrupted. But what exactly did they believe about the future? Did they anticipate the coming of a Messianic figure who would bring salvation? Some of the scrolls contain prophecies about a chosen one, raising the question of whether they foresaw the arrival of Jesus or another Messiah. To explore this, we must turn to one of the most debated aspects of the Dead Sea Scrolls, their Messianic prophecies and their possible connection to early Christianity. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves near Qumran was only part of the mystery. To truly understand the significance of these ancient texts, one must examine the ruins of Qumran itself, a remote settlement that stood on the edge of the Judean desert, overlooking the Dead Sea. This isolated and desolate location, far from the bustling cities of Jerusalem and Jericho, may hold the key to understanding who wrote the scrolls and why they were hidden away for centuries. Archaeological excavations at Qumran have revealed the remains of a structured, organized community, suggesting that it was home to a religious group that had withdrawn from mainstream Jewish society. The site contains the foundations of buildings, large communal halls, storage rooms, ritual baths, and a sophisticated water system that collected and stored rainwater, an essential feature for survival in the harsh desert environment. The layout of Qumran suggests that its inhabitants lived a disciplined, almost monastic life, devoted to study, prayer, and strict observance of religious laws. One of the most significant features of Qumran is the presence of multiple ritual baths, far more than would be expected for a small settlement. These baths indicate that the community placed a strong emphasis on ritual purity, a concept central to Jewish religious life. The frequency with which the inhabitants performed these purification rites suggests that they viewed themselves as a people set apart, maintaining a state of spiritual readiness. This practice aligns closely with descriptions of the Essenes, the Jewish sect often associated with Qumran, who who were known for their strict purity laws and rejection of the corruption they believed had overtaken the Jerusalem temple. Another compelling piece of evidence linking Qumran to the Dead Sea Scrolls is the discovery of what appears to be a scriptorium, a room equipped with benches and inkwells, suggesting that it may have been used for copying and studying sacred texts. If this interpretation is correct, it provides direct evidence that Qumran was not just a place of residence, but a center for religious scholarship, where scribes meticulously preserved and transmitted ancient writings. The presence of the scrolls in nearby caves strengthens the idea that the settlement's inhabitants were responsible for creating or at least safeguarding these texts. Despite the overwhelming evidence that Qumran was home to a religious community, some scholars have proposed alternative theories. Some suggest that Qumran may have been a fortress or a seasonal settlement used by traveling groups, rather than a permanent monastic retreat. Others argue that the scrolls may not have been written at Qumran at all, but were instead brought there from elsewhere, perhaps from Jerusalem, by individuals seeking to protect them from destruction. While these theories remain debated, the close connection between the settlement's archaeological remains and the themes found in the scrolls makes it likely that Qumran was indeed a spiritual and scholarly center. The isolation of Qumran would have provided the perfect environment for a community that sought to distance itself from the outside world. The sectarian writings found among the scrolls suggest that the people who lived there viewed themselves as the true followers of God's law, separate from what they saw as a corrupt society. They awaited divine intervention, believing that God would soon judge the wicked and establish a kingdom of righteousness. Their focus on purity, scripture, and prophecy indicates that they were not simply passive observers of history, but rather a group that saw itself as playing an active role in God's unfolding plan. The ruins of Qumran, combined with the scrolls found in the nearby caves, offer a glimpse into the spiritual landscape of the time. They reveal a world in which different Jewish sects interpreted scripture in various ways, sometimes in conflict with one another. The people of Qumran saw themselves as keepers of divine truth, preserving knowledge that others had ignored or corrupted. But what exactly did they believe about the future? Did they anticipate the coming of a messianic figure who would bring salvation? Some of the scrolls contain prophecies about a chosen one, raising the question of whether they foresaw the arrival of Jesus or another Messiah. To explore this, we must turn to one of the most debated aspects of the Dead Sea Scrolls, their messianic prophecies and their possible connection to early Christianity. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain numerous references to a coming Messiah, a figure who would bring salvation and restore righteousness to Israel. These messianic prophecies have sparked intense debate among scholars and theologians, raising the question: did the people of Qumran foresee the arrival of Jesus Christ, or were they expecting someone else? While the scrolls never explicitly mention Jesus by name, they describe a messianic figure with characteristics that bear striking similarities to the way Christ is depicted in the New Testament. However, the scrolls also present a complex and varied understanding of the Messiah, one that differs in key ways from traditional Christian theology. One of the most important messianic texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls is the so-called Messianic Apocalypse. This document describes a time when the heavens and earth will be transformed, and the Lord will send his anointed one to bring healing, resurrection, and justice. The text speaks of a Messiah who will free the captives, give sight to the blind, raise the dead, and bring good news to the poor. These words are remarkably similar to Jesus' own words in the Gospel of Luke, where he reads from the scroll of Isaiah in the synagogue and declares that he has come to fulfill this prophecy. Luke 4 verse 18 to 19. The parallels have led some to suggest that the messianic expectations of the Qumran community were closely aligned with the message of Jesus, or that Jesus himself may have been aware of these texts. However, unlike the Christian understanding of a single Messiah, the Dead Sea Scrolls suggest that the Qumran community anticipated not one but two messianic figures, one priestly, and one kingly. This belief is reflected in texts such as the Testimonia and the Rule of the Congregation, which describe a future in which a priestly Messiah from the line of Aaron and a royal Messiah from the line of David would lead Israel together. The priestly Messiah would be responsible for teaching and interpreting God's law, while the Davidic Messiah would rule as a righteous king, delivering Israel from its enemies. This dual messianic expectation differs from the Christian view, which sees Jesus as fulfilling both the roles of high priest and king in one person. Another key messianic text, the War Scroll, describes a final apocalyptic battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. This war would be led by a messianic leader who would destroy the wicked and establish God's kingdom on earth. The militant tone of this prophecy stands in contrast to Jesus' teachings, which emphasized love, forgiveness, and the transformation of the heart, rather than armed conflict. If the Qumran community believed in a warrior Messiah, this would further distinguish their messianic hopes from the message of Jesus, who preached a kingdom not of this world, John 18 verse 36. The scrolls also contain numerous references to an eschatological figure known as the Teacher of Righteousness. Some scholars believe this may have been a real historical leader of the Qumran community, a priest or prophet who guided the sect and whose teachings were foundational to their beliefs. Some have even speculated that this figure was seen as an early messianic leader, possibly foreshadowing the later role of Jesus. However, there is no direct evidence that the Teacher of Righteousness was viewed as divine or that he was expected to return as the Messiah. Instead, he seems to have been regarded as a forerunner, much like John the Baptist in the Christian tradition. The presence of these messianic prophecies within the Dead Sea Scrolls raises important questions about the broader religious climate in which Jesus lived. It suggests that the idea of a coming Messiah was not unique to Christianity, but was already a major expectation among certain Jewish groups. The similarities between some Qumran texts and Jesus' teachings indicate that he may have been drawing from a shared tradition, while the differences highlight the distinctiveness of his message. While the Dead Sea Scrolls do not directly predict Jesus Christ as the Messiah, they provide crucial context for understanding the messianic hopes of the time. They reveal a world in which Jewish groups were eagerly awaiting divine intervention, longing for a leader who would restore Israel and fulfill God's promises. But if the scrolls contain prophecies that were once hidden from the wider world, could this explain why they were deliberately concealed in the caves? Were they hidden to protect them from destruction, or were they kept secret because they contained knowledge that was considered too dangerous? To explore this further, we must turn to the mystery of why the scrolls were hidden and what this might reveal about their true purpose. The Dead Sea Scrolls remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years, carefully placed inside clay jars and sealed away in the remote caves of Qumran. Their concealment was no accident. Whoever hid them understood their significance and took great care to ensure their preservation. But why were these texts buried in the first place? Were they hidden to protect sacred knowledge from destruction? Did they contain teachings that were considered too controversial or dangerous? Or were they simply left behind in a moment of crisis, never meant to be discovered? The most widely accepted theory is that the scrolls were hidden during a time of war, as Jewish communities faced increasing persecution and destruction at the hands of the Roman Empire. The late Second Temple period was marked by political upheaval, religious tensions, and violent conflicts between Jewish factions and Roman authorities. The Great Jewish Revolt was a defining moment in this struggle, leading to the destruction of the Jerusalem Temple and the loss of Jewish sovereignty. During this period of chaos, the Qumran community, if it was indeed the home of the Essenes or a similar sect, may have buried the scrolls in the caves to protect them from looters, Roman soldiers, or rival Jewish groups. If this was the case, the community that preserved the scrolls may never have had the opportunity to retrieve them, leaving their knowledge lost to history until their rediscovery in the 20th century. Another possibility is that the scrolls were hidden as part of an effort to safeguard sacred texts that were not accepted by the religious authorities in Jerusalem. Some of the writings found at Qumran contain interpretations of Scripture that differ from mainstream Jewish teachings, suggesting that the community saw itself as separate from the priesthood that controlled the temple. If they viewed their understanding of the law as the true one, they may have feared that their writings would be confiscated or destroyed by those who opposed their beliefs. By hiding them in the caves, they ensured that their vision of Judaism would not be erased, even if their community itself was wiped out. There is also the question of whether the scrolls were considered dangerous, either politically or theologically. Some of the texts contain apocalyptic prophecies, descriptions of divine judgment, and critiques of the religious establishment. If these writings were seen as a challenge to the ruling powers, both Jewish and Roman, then they may have been hidden to protect their authors from persecution. In a time when both Rome and the Jewish priesthood sought to maintain control over religious thought, possessing such radical texts could have been seen as a threat. The scrolls speak of a coming transformation, a final battle between good and evil, and the rise of a Messianic leader who would overthrow the forces of darkness. In an age of rebellion and Messianic expectation, such ideas could have been seen as revolutionary, making their preservation all the more urgent. The method of hiding the scrolls also suggests a deliberate attempt to preserve them for future generations. The clay jars used to store the manuscripts were designed to protect them from moisture, and the caves chosen for their concealment were difficult to access, ensuring that only those who knew of their location could retrieve them. This level of care indicates that the people who hid the scrolls understood their importance and believed that one day they would be needed again. Whether they expected their community to return or hoped that a future generation would uncover their writings remains unknown, but their actions ensured that these texts survived for over 2 millennia. The burial of the scrolls at Qumran raises deeper questions about the nature of religious knowledge and who controls access to it. If these texts were hidden to prevent their destruction, what other writings might have been lost to history? Were there books of Scripture that were once considered sacred, but were later removed from the accepted canon? The scrolls contain versions of biblical texts that differ from those in the modern Bible, showing that religious tradition was not always fixed, but evolved over time. Their concealment may have been an attempt to preserve an alternative vision of Judaism, one that did not survive in the mainstream tradition, but was kept alive in secret, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The fact that the scrolls remained hidden for so long adds to their mystery. They were buried in a time of crisis, forgotten by history, and then uncovered in an era when modern scholarship could finally analyze their meaning. Their rediscovery has challenged long-held assumptions about the development of the Bible and the diversity of religious thought in the ancient world. But their existence also raises another question. Do these texts change our understanding of Scripture? If the scrolls contain alternative versions of biblical books, do they alter the way we should read the Bible today? To explore this, we must examine how the Dead Sea Scrolls compare to the modern Bible and whether they truly change everything we thought we knew. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls revolutionized biblical scholarship, offering a rare opportunity to compare modern versions of the Bible with manuscripts that predate them by more than 1,000 years. The question remains, do the scrolls confirm the accuracy of the Bible as we know it today, or do they reveal significant differences that challenge traditional beliefs? Scholars have debated whether these ancient texts change our understanding of Scripture, showing that the biblical tradition was more fluid than previously thought. One of the most remarkable findings is that many of the biblical texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls closely resemble the versions found in the modern Hebrew Bible. This suggests that the core texts of Scripture have been transmitted with a high degree of accuracy over the centuries. Books such as Isaiah, Deuteronomy, and the Psalms appear in nearly identical form, demonstrating that the scribes who preserved the Bible were meticulous in their copying practices. The Great Isaiah Scroll, one of the most complete manuscripts found at Qumran, is nearly identical to the Masoretic text used in Jewish and Christian Bibles today, with only minor variations in wording and spelling. This remarkable consistency strengthens the argument that the Bible has been faithfully preserved through the generations. However, not all the biblical texts found in the scrolls match the modern Bible exactly. Some contain variations that offer alternative readings of familiar passages, suggesting that different versions of Scripture circulated in ancient times. In some cases, the differences are minor, variations in grammar, spelling, or word choice that do not significantly alter the meaning of the text. But in other cases, the changes are more substantial, affecting the interpretation of certain passages. These differences indicate that the biblical tradition was not entirely fixed during the Second Temple period, and that different Jewish communities may have had slightly different versions of the same sacred texts. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Dead Sea Scrolls is the presence of additional material in some biblical books. For example, the scrolls contain a longer version of the Book of Samuel, including passages that are missing from the traditional Hebrew text. These additions suggest that some biblical books may have existed in multiple versions before a final standardized text was established. Similarly, some scrolls contain expanded versions of certain psalms, indicating that the Book of Psalms may have been more fluid in its early history than previously thought. The presence of these variations raises important questions about how the biblical canon was formed and whether some texts that were once considered scripture were later edited or removed. Beyond variations in biblical texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls also include writings that were not included in the Hebrew Bible at all. These apocryphal and sectarian writings provide insight into alternative religious traditions that existed alongside mainstream Judaism. Some of these texts, such as the Book of Enoch and the Temple Scroll, contain teachings and prophecies that were highly influential in certain Jewish communities, but were ultimately left out of the biblical canon. The fact that these writings were preserved alongside biblical texts suggests that the community at Qumran viewed them as important, possibly even sacred. This challenges the idea that the biblical canon was firmly established in ancient times and raises the possibility that other texts may have once been considered scripture before being excluded. Despite these variations and additions, the Dead Sea Scrolls do not fundamentally change the overall message of the Bible. While they provide alternative readings and additional insights, they do not contradict the core themes of biblical teaching. Instead, they offer a deeper understanding of how Scripture was transmitted, interpreted, and preserved over time. The scrolls confirm that the Bible as we have it today has ancient roots, but they also remind us that the process of preserving and compiling Scripture was more complex than previously assumed. The discovery of these ancient texts has reshaped our understanding of the Bible, not by disproving it, but by revealing the historical process through which it was formed. They show that Scripture was carefully copied and transmitted, yet also shaped by the religious debates and traditions of different Jewish communities. The scrolls highlight the diversity of thought within early Judaism and provide valuable context for understanding both the Old Testament and the emergence of early Christianity. While the Dead Sea Scrolls have deepened our knowledge of biblical history, they have also sparked controversy. Some scholars argue that certain discoveries challenge traditional religious interpretations, while others suggest that powerful institutions may have sought to suppress parts of the scrolls. The question of whether the scrolls contain hidden knowledge that was deliberately concealed has fueled numerous conspiracy theories, particularly regarding the Vatican's role in delaying their publication. To examine this further, we must explore the controversies surrounding the scrolls and whether there was an effort to keep some of their contents hidden from the public. From the moment the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, they became the subject of intense scholarly debate. But beyond academic discussions about their content and significance, The scrolls have also been at the heart of various conspiracy theories, some of which claim that powerful religious institutions, including the Vatican, sought to suppress or control their release. The idea that the scrolls contain hidden knowledge that could challenge traditional religious beliefs has fueled speculation for decades, leading many to wonder whether the full truth about these ancient texts has ever been revealed. One of the main reasons for these conspiracy theories is the significant delay in the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Although the first scrolls were discovered in 1947, it took decades before many of them were made accessible to the wider public. While some of the scrolls were quickly studied and published, a large portion remained locked away under the control of a small group of scholars who had exclusive access to the documents. This secrecy led to growing frustration among researchers and religious communities who believed that critical information was being withheld. For many years, only a handful of scholars, primarily Catholic and working under the auspices of the Dominican-run Col Biblique in Jerusalem, were responsible for editing and translating the scrolls. Their slow progress and refusal to release the texts in full led to accusations that they were deliberately suppressing information, particularly any discoveries that might challenge Christian doctrine. Ohm speculated that the Vatican was involved in restricting access to the scrolls, fearing that certain texts might undermine traditional interpretations of Jesus, the Bible, or the origins of Christianity. The idea that the scrolls contained revelations that could disrupt the foundations of the Church gained traction, despite a lack of direct evidence supporting these claims. The Vatican has consistently denied any involvement in suppressing the Dead Sea Scrolls, stating that it had no control over their study and publication. However, secrecy surrounding the documents only fueled suspicions. By the 1980s, scholars outside the official research team began demanding access to the unpublished scrolls, arguing that keeping them hidden was both unethical and a hindrance to academic progress. The controversy intensified in 1991 when, after decades of restricted access, the Huntington Library in California released unauthorized photographs of the remaining unpublished scrolls, effectively breaking the monopoly held by the small group of researchers. This move forced the hand of the official team, leading to the eventual publication of the complete set of scrolls. Despite the many theories surrounding their discovery and publication, the Dead Sea Scrolls remain one of the most significant archaeological finds in history. Their eventual release has allowed scholars, theologians, and historians to study them freely, shedding light on ancient Judaism, biblical history, and the origins of Christian thought. While the question of whether anything was deliberately hidden will likely never be fully answered, the scrolls themselves continue to offer new insights into the spiritual and intellectual life of a long-lost community. Although much of the controversy surrounding the scrolls has focused on their supposed suppression, a different mystery lies in their remarkable preservation. These ancient documents, written on fragile parchment and papyrus, survived for over 2,000 years in the harsh desert climate. Understanding how they endured the passage of time requires an exploration of the science behind their preservation, the techniques used by modern scholars to restore them, and the ongoing efforts to ensure their survival for future generations. The survival of the Dead Sea Scrolls is nothing short of a scientific marvel. For over 2,000 years, these delicate manuscripts remained hidden in desert caves, exposed to the passage of time yet remarkably preserved. How did these ancient documents withstand the harsh conditions of the Judean desert? And what methods have scholars used to restore and protect them in the modern era? The answer lies in a combination of environmental factors, ancient preservation techniques, and cutting-edge technology that continues to reveal new insights about the scrolls today. One of the key reasons the scrolls survived for so long is the unique climate of the Dead Sea region. The caves of Qumran, where the scrolls were found, provided the ideal conditions for preservation: dry, dark, and relatively stable in temperature. Unlike more humid environments, Where organic materials such as parchment and papyrus would have decayed quickly, the arid desert air prevented the rapid growth of mold and bacteria. The caves acted as natural protective chambers, shielding the scrolls from exposure to sunlight, moisture, and extreme temperature fluctuations that could have otherwise caused them to deteriorate. Another crucial factor was the way the scrolls were stored. Many were placed inside clay jars with tight-fitting lids, which helped protect them from dust, insects, and physical damage. These jars, made from locally sourced materials, acted as sealed containers, preserving the manuscripts in their original state for centuries. The decision to store the scrolls in this manner suggests that the people who hid them understood the importance of keeping them intact, possibly anticipating a time when they would be recovered and studied once again. Despite these favorable conditions, the scrolls did not emerge from the caves completely unscathed. Many were found in fragmented and deteriorated states, damaged by time, shifting rock formations, and in some cases, the very people who discovered them. The initial handling of the scrolls by Bedouin shepherds and early scholars led to further deterioration, as untrained hands unrolled brittle parchment, exposing it to air and causing pieces to break apart. Some of the scrolls were also affected by animal activity, with evidence of nibbling by insects and rodents that had found their way into the caves. To restore and preserve these fragile texts, scholars have employed a range of scientific techniques. One of the earliest preservation efforts involved carefully unrolling the scrolls using humidified air, a method designed to soften the parchment and prevent further cracking. This delicate process allowed researchers to open scrolls that had been tightly wound for centuries without causing additional damage. However, not all scrolls could be unrolled so easily. The copper scroll, for instance, which was inscribed onto thin sheets of metal rather than parchment, was so corroded that researchers had to cut it into sections to study its inscriptions. Modern technology has played a crucial role in deciphering and preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the most significant breakthroughs has been the use of multispectral imaging, a technique that allows researchers to analyze the scrolls under different wavelengths of light. By using infrared and ultraviolet imaging, scholars have been able to detect faded or invisible ink, revealing text that was previously unreadable. This has led to the discovery of new words, phrases, and even entire passages that had been lost due to the scroll's deteriorated condition. Another major advancement is the creation of digital reconstructions of the scrolls. By using high-resolution photography and computer algorithms, researchers have been able to virtually piece together fragments that were once thought to be unrelated. Some of the scrolls exist only in thousands of tiny fragments, making traditional reconstruction nearly impossible. However, with the help of artificial intelligence and pattern recognition software, scholars have been able to match pieces based on ink composition, handwriting style, and material characteristics, allowing for more accurate reconstructions of these ancient texts. Preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls for future generations remains an ongoing challenge. Despite careful conservation efforts, the scrolls are still vulnerable to environmental factors, including fluctuations in humidity and exposure to light. To address this, many of the original manuscripts are now stored in climate-controlled environments where temperature, moisture, and lighting conditions are carefully regulated. Museums and research institutions have also created digital archives, allowing scholars and the public to access high-quality images of the scrolls without putting the originals at risk. The study of the scrolls continues to evolve, with new technologies offering even more possibilities for analysis. Scientists are now using DNA testing to study the animal skins used to make the parchment, which may help determine whether different scrolls came from the same source. Other researchers are using chemical analysis to identify the ink composition, providing insights into the materials and techniques used by the scribes who wrote these ancient texts. While the Dead Sea Scrolls have already transformed our understanding of biblical history, their full significance is still being uncovered. Advances in preservation and analysis continue to reveal new details about their origins, content, and meaning. But beyond their historical and scholarly value, the scrolls also carry a deeper message, one that connects the past with the present. As some of the oldest known religious manuscripts, they offer a link to the faith, devotion, and perseverance of those who wrote and protected them. Even after 2,000 years, their words remain, waiting to be studied, understood, and appreciated by future generations. One of the most profound impacts of the Dead Sea Scrolls is their confirmation of the remarkable accuracy with which the Hebrew Bible has been preserved over the centuries. Before their discovery, the oldest known copies of the Old Testament dated back to the medieval period, copied by Jewish scribes known as the Masoretes. The scrolls pushed this timeline back by more than 1,000 years, revealing texts that were virtually identical in many cases to the Masoretic tradition. This finding reaffirmed the reliability of biblical transmission, showing that the words of Scripture had been carefully preserved across generations. At the same time, the scrolls also reveal variations and alternative readings of biblical texts, highlighting the fact that the process of compiling and canonizing the Bible was not instantaneous, but evolved over centuries. Some books of the Bible appear in different versions, while others contain passages that are absent from later texts. These discoveries remind us that the development of sacred scripture was shaped by diverse traditions, interpretations, and debates within ancient Jewish communities. For religious scholars, the Dead Sea Scrolls provide an unparalleled glimpse into the beliefs and practices of a Jewish sect that lived during the Second Temple period. The scrolls' authors, whether the Essenes or another group, saw themselves as the true remnant of Israel, awaiting divine intervention and the coming of a Messiah. Their writings reveal a deep concern for purity, prophecy, and apocalyptic visions, concerns that were also present in early Christianity. While the scrolls do not directly reference Jesus, they provide essential context for understanding the religious climate in which he preached, showing that many of his teachings resonated with existing Jewish Messianic expectations. For modern believers, the scrolls offer a reminder of the resilience of faith. The community that preserved these texts did so at great personal cost, believing that their writings contained truths worth safeguarding, even in the face of persecution and destruction. Their devotion to Scripture, their hope in a promised deliverance, and their willingness to separate themselves from a world they saw as corrupt reflected deep commitment to their spiritual calling. This dedication speaks across time, reminding us of the enduring power of faith and the sacrifices made by those who sought to preserve it. The Dead Sea Scrolls also challenge us to consider how knowledge and religious tradition are shaped by history. They remind us that sacred texts were not always as fixed and unchanging as they may seem today. Different Jewish groups held different interpretations of Scripture, and the process of determining which writings were considered authoritative was ongoing. This realization does not diminish the value of the Bible, but instead enriches our understanding of how divine revelation was understood and transmitted in the ancient world. Even beyond their religious significance, the scrolls have left a lasting legacy in the fields of archaeology, linguistics, and historical research. They have provided a wealth of information about the Hebrew language, Jewish law, and the cultural landscape of the ancient Middle East. They have also demonstrated the incredible capabilities of modern technology in uncovering and preserving the past, with digital imaging and artificial intelligence now playing a role in deciphering texts that had remained unreadable for centuries. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that truth, once hidden, has a way of resurfacing. These texts, buried in desert caves for thousands of years, were eventually brought to light at a time when the world was ready to study and understand them. Their discovery was not just an accident of history. It was a reminder that the past still has much to teach us. The scrolls continue to inspire curiosity, faith, and debate, proving that the search for knowledge and spiritual meaning is never truly finished. As scholars continue to analyze the scrolls, new insights will undoubtedly emerge, further shaping our understanding of the Bible, history, and the people who sought to preserve their vision of truth. The journey of discovery is ongoing, and the lessons of the Dead Sea Scrolls will continue to resonate for generations to come. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not just an archaeological marvel. They are a key to understanding how the Bible was shaped and what ideas were once considered sacred, but later lost. They reveal a world of hidden knowledge, a time of intense spiritual expectation, and a faith preserved in the shadows of history. But the greatest mystery remains. Were these scrolls meant to be hidden forever, or were they destined to be discovered at just the right moment? Could they be the missing piece of the puzzle, reshaping everything we thought we knew about the Bible and its origins? Perhaps the answers have been waiting for us all along, buried in the sands of time, waiting for those willing to seek the truth. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content on biblical history and hidden truths from the past. Like the video to support the work behind it. Leave a comment to share your thoughts on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and let us know which topic you'd like to see covered next. Most importantly, share this video with your friends and family so that more people can learn about these incredible discoveries and their impact on our understanding of faith and history. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.